Saxophone.
All right. Hi, everybody. Dennis Prager, welcome to my home for my nearly weekly fireside chat. The difference today is you folks have to see his face. It's no fun if you don't see this animal's face. Is there any way you guys can get the camera? I mean, people are dying. You got to do it, even though it's not professional. You got to get it over. If this doesn't make you smile, I want you to know I have him nearly since he was born, and I'm still laughing looking at him. This is the great joy. My view is the purpose of a dog or any pet for that is to make you laugh, and if they can do that, they add to your life. They add longevity. They add health. And that's he is one of a kind in that way. All right. Anyway, welcome. I'm Dennis Prager, in case I didn't say, and welcome to the home. Normally, it's just you and now that's interesting. It's just you and me, correct? Yes, just me. Right. It's just you and me, not just you and I. I'm a stickler for these things, but I have a terrific guest who you are in the rarefied realm of. For most people, doesn't need an introduction.
Oh, wow. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, that's a big deal. Ben Shapiro. But if I did officially introduce Ben Shapiro, what would I say?
Well, I mean, probably job description, right? Editor-in-chief of Daily Wire and host of the Ben Shapiro Show podcast, which is, not to brag, but the most widely listened to conservative podcast in America.
Is that right?
Yeah, by far. Thank God. It does real well.
Good. Well, that's great. Whatever you deserve it. You work hard and you have a lot to say.
Well, thank you.
That's why you're here. It's been a long time. I was at your house. Actually, was it your parents' house or your house?
It was my house.
It was at your house. You've since moved, and now you're first time in mine, and it's a pleasure to have you here.
Well, I love the library. We were discussing that earlier. I mean, it's like the library that is out of any movie that has a library in it.
Right. Yes, even with the fireplace. But there were probably 1,000 books in this room, and it's... I read a lot of books on Kindle. I do. I love reading that way, but there is nothing like being surrounded by the physicality of a book.
I'm 33. I tried a Kindle. I couldn't do it.
Oh, really?
And, part of the reason I couldn't do it, I love holding the book. I love turning the pages. Also, when you read on Shabbat, it's a problem. If I'm stuck in the middle of a book and I won't use the Kindle on Shabbat. Oh, because you don't use electricity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, I'm just explaining because I grew up that way. I'm well aware. So on the Sabbath, on Shabbat, as it is in Hebrew, Orthodox Jews don't use electricity. So that would render the Kindle
if you're in the middle of a really good book, then you hit Shabbat and it's like, turn it off.
Right, exactly. So. But in theory, though, you wouldn't even really hold it, right? Because of muktzah.
Yeah, I mean, although muktzah is more of, it's more of a custom than it is a halacha. But,
okay, anyway, we're not going to get into
we promise we won't. This won't
the
be
details of Jewish law.
That'd be a horrifying hour.
And that's said by someone who observes it.
That's right.
That's fine. Anyway, it's really, we could have a blast here just on anything. I have a strong suspicion. What I want to talk to you about a lot of things. And by the way, is it fair to say that I had a role in your life prior to your being born?
Yeah, absolutely. And my parents started moving toward Orthodoxy because of you. So they listened to your show, and then they started going down to the Venice community where Rabbi Lapin was at the time, and they started becoming Orthodox in that direction by listening to your show.
That's very touching.
Yeah,
I'm very touched by that. That's very sweet. Okay. Anyway, so I have a long time in the Shapiro family. Really.
Yeah, absolutely. And then of course I listened to your show from the time I was capable of listening to talk radio. So.
Which is with you was what, about 3?
Well, in utero.
Yeah, utero. That's right. Well, that may be. What year were you born?
84.
So I started radio in 82, I think. I believe that's correct, or 82 or 83. So that may well be.
So your voice has been reverberating in my life.
That's very funny.
I just heard this very deep baritone. This basso profundo coming through the walls of the uterus.
Well, the hope is that it was profundo. That's right. That's the point. So I'm going to start with the elephant in the room, all right? Because I like addressing these issues, and I know you know what it is. And it's really just, there's no debate here or anything like that. So you were a never Trumper. I was not, obviously. We debated this on my show. It was a terrific hour. People loved it.
Yeah,
because we didn't yell at each other. We both respect each other so much. And, my God, if conservatives can't respect each other when they differ, then we're doomed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's one thing. The left-right divide is I think unbridgeable and huge, and I understand that. But I mean, even within the same ideological community, we should be able to talk to each other and still love each other. All right, but be that as it may, so we debated that then. You wrote a piece in National Review, which I actually thought was terrific. I should drop actually. I just realized that's somewhat taking back your compliment.
Oh, yeah, no worries.
You know, it's like saying, you really look great today.
Yeah, as opposed to all other days.
Yes,
when
exactly.
You look like absolute
right. Yeah.
horse crap. But yeah.
Yes, that's right. But it was wonderful, and it was about. And if I don't want to summarize it to my benefit. I don't mean my ideological benefit, but to my understanding. Tell me if your point was, and you used historical data, which I found fascinating. Folks, don't get carried away with what presidents say.
Yeah.
Be preoccupied with what they do, which is what I answer to people. Well, you know, Trump tweeted X, Y, Z. I said, I don't pay attention to his tweets. The guy, from my perspective, he has done the most conservative things in the presidency in my lifetime, and that includes Reagan. So that's how I measure him. Is that a fair statement?
So I think that he's done a lot of good things. I think he's done some stuff that isn't as good in my view. I think that his economic nationalist program, the carrier deal, for example, is not something that I was in favor of. I think the sort of crony corporatism of that's not something I like. But yeah, he's done a bunch of great things too. I mean, his executive order with regard to cutting regulations, his
what he's
obviously
doing
Judge
with
Gorsuch,
the
of course.
EPA.
The EPA is terrific. Yeah, all that stuff. We're on the same page on this stuff, obviously.
Exactly.
So,
So at this point, are you happy he was elected?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I'm happy he was elected at this point.
I don't want to ask the next question.
Well, you can. I mean,
so if you were a prophet, would you have been a never Trumper?
All I can say is that based on the data up to the election.
Okay, that's fair.
I made the decision that
so
I
you've
thought
been
was
pleasantly
fair.
surprised.
That's right. I've been pleasantly surprised. But in some, I will say this: in terms of his character, I don't think I've been pleasantly surprised. I think he's exactly the same character he always was. In terms of his policy, I've been pleasantly surprised so far. What I say to people right now is that I'm trying to take all the data points in. So a lot of the data points right now are really good. I like a lot of the data points I'm seeing, but to declare this a Surratt masterpiece is a little bit early. So we're very close up on the painting. He's been here for 2 months.
Well, that's true for anybody.
Exactly.
Okay, that's
true.
fair.
And so I want to wait 4 years.
By the way, I just want to say to you folks watching, my position was, as you well know, I was against Donald Trump until the nomination. I was severe in my critiques of him. He was my last choice. I wrote this in National Review and elsewhere regularly. But I said from my first column, if he's nominated, I will support him. I will vote for him. I will support him. And that's exactly what I did once he was nominated, because to me, there was no choice. Anyway, just explaining my view.
To me, there was no choice either, which is why I didn't vote for either of them.
Right. Yeah. That's a very funny way. Does no choice mean? No choice can mean either way.
I mean, that really what it came down to is I think that there's two ways to view voting. I mean, not to rehash an argument that's almost irrelevant at this point.
Correct.
But there's two ways to view voting. One is your vote is a coupon that expires the day after the election. And so you have to use it during the election or it's worthless. And the other way is to say someone has to earn your vote, right? And that there's a certain amount of moral imprimatur that comes with casting your vote for somebody. And so my view was neither of these people met my minimum standard to be the president. And then there was another concern, which I think it's a little early for me to rule on, which is how much was Trumpism going to hijack the philosophy of conservatism and convert conservatism's core into something different. So that's a different question from do I like some of his policies? Because I can like a lot of his policies, but if that means that he's carving away, for example, at the idea that healthcare ought to be a private sector thing because he keeps saying that health insurance is something that everybody needs to have and the government needs to ensure is provided, that's a problem. So that's an argument that I think is still up in the air, and I don't think that one's been solved yet. I don't think it'll be solved for some time because there is a bit of a soul fight happening in the Republican Party between people who say, here's what I like about him that's conservative, here's what I don't like about his philosophy, and people saying, he won, I'm going to buy into everything. And there are those people on our side of the aisle. And so that is a question that I think is still open. So am I happy he was elected at this point? Of course. I mean, listen, I can honestly say that the moment it was clear that he was going to be elected, I felt a surge of joy that Hillary Clinton would never be president of the United States.
Right, but would you have felt a surge of joy had she won that he wouldn't be president?
No.
Okay, all right. So
I would have
you
felt...
were emotionally for him, but you couldn't vote for him.
Yes.
Right. Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to rehash the argument either. But again, for the sake of my viewers who may not be acquainted with what my position was, there's no choice because I think the left is truly destroying Western civilization. Not liberals, the left.
The ramifications, though, now it'll be interesting to see because I think how people cover Trump is now, forget about the election past, is interesting. So my view has been that with Trump, I call balls and strikes, and I do it from a conservative point of view. So if he does something I think is not conservative, I'm happy to call him out and say that's not conservative. This does not match with my philosophy. It's wrong. Or if he fibs about something, I'm happy to say he fibbed. That's wrong. I wish he wouldn't fib. As far as my overall view of his policy, like I say, I agree with probably 80% of his policy and about 40% of his rhetoric, but I think policy matters more than rhetoric. Right. The case I was making in National Review is actually that the upside to the fact that Trump says so many sort of ridiculous things on Twitter is that I think that at a certain point, Americans will be inured to that. At a certain point, Americans will just go, okay, fine, so he's mouthing off on Twitter. Who really cares? Like what? And that's a good thing. I hope that Americans... My view of the presidency is the presidency should basically be a highly glorified DMV office. Like, here's your job. You're supposed to do it, and I don't want to hear from you. Just go back in your room.
You don't want a bully pulpit.
I don't want a bully pulpit. Right. I don't think the presidency ought to shape American life particularly
Yes, it's funny
much.
in that regard. All I want is a bully pulpit. That's why I haven't run for office.
Right.
I've always said I much prefer influence to power.
Yeah, and
I have no interest in power.
Well, but I think that the problem with the presidency as it's evolved since Wilson really is the idea that influence and power are the same thing. And so if you talked about Obama, the terrible things that Obama did, I would say that at least half the terrible things he did were solely in terms of his influence on America's culture and how we feel about each other, just solely with his rhetoric, because a lot of his policy prescriptions are being rolled back right now as we speak and will not have a long-lasting impact. We'll see about Obamacare, but even a lot of his smaller things are being rolled back.
All right, let me move on to some other stuff because, unfortunately, time is obviously, as you know, always limited in the truest sense of the word, by the way. You go to campuses a lot to speak. What have you found most resonates with young people of the points you make? So
I think that the point that I make that they get the most is the idea that I have a right to be here. I mean, that one obviously resonates with them. That even people on the left are now being liberals. I think that the divide that you've always made between the left and liberals, I think that's the gap that's widening in American life really wide, is that the hard left, which says you have to shut up, you can't come to campus, they're alienating even people who consider themselves left, but look at other leftists and say, that's crazy. Like, people should be allowed to speak. So that one is obviously a winner of a message. The other one is that, when I go on campus and I say to people, your life is in your own hands, you're some of the most privileged people on earth to be in America. That it's your job to go out and make something of yourself. The only person standing in your own way is you. No one cares enough about you to actually stop you. No one's thinking about you right now.
I did not know what your primary message was. I'm so happy to hear that. My answer to this, I think, truly nonsensical and dangerous in the sense that it just creates hatred. This view of white privilege.
Yeah.
My answer is America privilege. I have two answers. There were two privileges that I had really, and that is American privilege and two-parent privilege.
Yeah, exactly.
I had a father, which vast numbers of kids don't have, and he did not go to my ball games. I did not want him to go to my ball games. Do you know, by the way, because there's obviously such an age gap between us, I want to ask you a question on that. And you may have a totally different view, and that's fine. There's no right or wrong here. In my generation, and I know that I am not the outlier here, because I've asked Alan Estrin, my producer, who you know so well, and others of my generation. We did not want our parents to come to our games because we felt less manly.
Okay.
My mother is in the audience. Oh, ooh. So I'm curious, for your generation, did you want your parents to watch you do, did you play sports?
Yeah, I did.
Okay, did you want them to come to games?
Not my mom so much, my dad, yeah.
Okay, so
there's a difference. Like, dad being there, my dad coached my baseball team, too.
Right, okay.
I mean, some of my best memories are my dad coaching my baseball team, and there are a lot of male bonding moments. Like, one of my favorite stories is the first time I tried beer, it was my dad who gave it to me when I was 12. and it was at a baseball. Like we were supposed to play for it was the game before the championship in Little League. And my dad was coaching the team. We were supposed to lose. It was like 100 degrees outside, and my two of my cousins were on the team too. And my dad said on the way to the ball game, he says, "If we win today, because we're supposed to, he says, if we win today, I'm going to buy y'all beer." And my cousins didn't believe him. I knew my dad, so I was like, okay, that'll probably happen.
So what happened? Did you like the beer?
So we won the game. We pull up into the parking lot of like a CVS, I guess it was then a Rite Aid or something, and we go inside. And my dad asks my cousin, "You pick the beer," and my cousin was a history buff, so he says, "Okay, Sam Adams." So we got into the car. My dad drives up into the hills, and we pop open the beer. He's not drinking, but we are. He hands us each a beer. It's like I say, we're all dehydrated, we're dying, and so he hands one of my cousins the beer. He drinks about a quarter of it, doesn't like it. He hands me the beer. I drink about half of it. I'm not a huge fan of it. And one of my cousins guzzles the entire thing and just downs it in about two gulps.
He didn't become an alcoholic.
No, not at all. Right. The kicker was there's no air conditioner in the car. It's 100 degrees outside. We're now driving down the freeway with the windows open, and my cousin's got the bottle out the window, and my dad's screaming at him, "Get the bottle back in the car, Joel! Get the bottle back in the car!" No, none of us became alcoholics. Nobody died. No one was driving drunk. This is one of the nice things that you realize as a Jew. When you are given alcohol at a young age, you actually, in moderation, you don't end up an alcoholic.
Which we all are because of the holy day and Sabbath Kiddush, the blessing over the wine. That's exactly right. By the way, it's funny because my dad gave me my first cigar thinking I wouldn't like it, and I never liked alcohol. I have no interest in alcohol, but I love cigars. So you never know when you give your child some. You know what would be an interesting thing to write up? I would love to explore this issue of a difference in generational upbringing. I'm talking, I had a healthy home, you had a healthy home, but it was very different in that way. And I'd be curious if there were other things. I can't think offhand, but this notion of your parents coming, were your parents helicopter parents?
My dad a little bit, maybe, and not my mom.
Interesting. That's right. But my parents switched roles in any event.
That's right. My mom was the one who worked, and my dad was actually home with us.
Right.
So
why don't you react to that for a minute? How did you feel about that?
I mean, my dad's a wonderful person, so I'm glad that my dad was the one who was home. As any kid, I would say I sort of wish both my parents were home. But I love being brought up. My dad's really not uptight. He's really a lot of fun. It had its challenges for sure. Like for him, it was very challenging because it's not like he wanted to be a dad and he wanted that to be his chief role because his childhood was kind of a mess. And so it was very important to him to be home and not abandon the kids and be there all the time. But by the same token, if you don't have a successful career as a man, there's something very difficult about that. And that was something that he definitely had to struggle with, for sure.
But you didn't struggle with that, in vis-a-vis your dad?
No, not really vis-a-vis my dad.
That's what I'm asking.
Although I will say that it did drive me to say, okay, well, if it was important to my dad and he never really got a shot, he was a composer, and you either get a shot or you don't.
Right.
If he never really was able to succeed there, it kind of doubled me down on, okay, I'm going to work twice as hard and make sure that I don't have to deal with some of those issues.
So my position is essentially that the ideal, and I totally understand that vast numbers of people can't live the ideal. Look, I think the ideal is to have one marriage your whole life. I've been divorced. So I totally understand not everybody could live by an ideal, but society should posit ideals just to know, like Plato, this is what you aspire to.
For, exactly.
Yes. So my ideal is that there be someone who does take care of the home more or less. I totally understand part-time work, full-time.
I agree with that.
You do?
Yeah, I do agree with that. And I'm speaking as somebody who works a lot, and my wife is a doctor. But we have constructed our life around the idea that one or the other of us is home almost the entire time. So I leave in the morning at like 8 a.m., and then my daughter has preschool. And by the time she gets home from preschool, which is at like 12 or 1 o'clock, I'm already home. So even if I'm working from home, then I'm working from home.
Right.
But I'm home, or my wife is home, I would say 75% of the time.
Right.
So that and also I have the benefit of having both my parents who live close by. So my dad is also there a lot. So we have a real. I agree with you that that's the ideal. I also think that the key is however you stray from that ideal, you better have a support structure, because somebody better to be there to pick up the pieces. So, my wife couldn't do this, and she will freely acknowledge she couldn't do this if I did something else for a living. If my parents weren't they're nearby. Like we deliberately live a mile and a half from my
Right.
parents
No,
because we know that we need the support.
Well, that's the way it was in much of human history, and it is still in the world today. What do you think of the notion of 50-50?
I mean, I don't even know what that means.
Well,
like,
that's why I know you. Well, so that answers my question, obviously. But people have this notion, which I've never bought. It's not even as an ideal. The man does 50 of everything, the woman does 50 of everything, and I just don't know how, beyond theory, how that works.
No, that's foolish. I mean, I was talking with a friend of mine this morning. We were talking about marriage and what really makes a marriage work, and we were saying that what makes a marriage work is the man is committed to being the husband and the wife is committed to being the wife, and then once that's your commitment going in, you figure out what the interplay is. But you don't go in with the idea, here's what I'm demanding my spouse does. Right? If you go in with the idea, here's what I demand my spouse does, that's not going to work out well because you can't control what your spouse does. Right? You can have your idea of what you're going to do. My view is, look, I'm going to pick up as much of this. There are a bunch of pieces on the floor. I'm going to pick up as many of these as I can, and I know I need my wife's help, but she's also going to pick up as many as she can, and I'll tell her when I need help, and she'll tell me when she needs help. But there's no idea like, okay, I'm going to do the laundry half the time, you're going to do the laundry half the time, or I'm going to do the dishes half the time. First of all, she hates doing the dishes, and I hate doing the laundry, so I'll do the dishes and she does the laundry. But if it were easier for her to do both, she would do both. There have been times in our life where I'm doing nearly 100% of the housework, and she's doing nearly none. There have been times where it's precisely the reverse. And there are times when we pay a maid. So
your wife is a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
I assume I don't know for a fact, but I assume only because this is what women tend to do who become doctors: radiology, ophthalmology, anesthesiology,
dermatology. Yeah, the road. Yeah.
Yes.
No, she's doing family medicine, and the reason she's doing family medicine is because she didn't want to be in school as long and in residency as long, and because she wants to be able to work part-time when she's done. And she's made career choices specifically predicated on being home with the kids.
All right, now here's an interesting...
She took off a year with our first kid. She took off 6 months with the second.
Here's an interesting social, societal, individual tension. Half the doctors now are women. But women do what your wife is doing, and I totally support it.
Mm-hmm.
But for society, we have less doctor hours as a result of more women being doctors.
Right.
So there's a real tension between what's good for the individual doctor and what's good for society.
Well, that tension would immediately disappear if we had a free market system, right? Because then people would be able to pay a doctor to do whatever, and people would get into the business of doctoring.
There would also be if the free market system worked, we'd have more medical schools.
Right, more medical schools. There would actually probably be shorter residencies. The residencies wouldn't be quite so long, actually, because there would be an urge to get people into the marketplace to actually perform. It's a cartel, the residencies largely, because you're working doctors, people who've graduated from medical school, you're working them like at below minimum wage rates. But a lot of that would disappear. And again, half the services that you get from your doctor, you could probably get from a nurse or a nurse practitioner. I mean, there's no reason that you should have to go through a doctor to get an x-ray. You should be able to walk into like an x-ray tech and pay him $100 and tell him to snap a photo of you.
Well, of course, I know you know this. I'm just saying it for the benefit of the viewers, that the greatest proof of the power of free market, which actually I'm not even thrilled with the term, because people who don't fully understand it don't understand what it really means is people choose what they'll buy.
Right.
And they choose what they'll pay. That's what free market means. I mean, when you put it that way, it's almost hard to resist. But the proof is plastic surgery.
Yeah.
I mean, it's gotten far better than ever before. And far cheaper.
Yeah, LASIK eye surgery is the one that people usually use.
I didn't realize that's
it used to be like $10,000 an eye.
Yeah,
and it's not insured, so nobody went through their insurance.
That's
you just
right.
paid cash up front.
Yeah.
Now it's like $2,000 an eye, and the quality's 5 times as good as it was.
Of course, it's so painful that you and I, and obviously not only you and I, but we understand it's this stuff. Here's what is it? Margaret Thatcher said, "Facts are conservative."
Mm-hmm.
I would go totally correct. There's another thing that makes you conservative: common sense. People write to me, it's one of the most common reactions I've gotten in my long career. God, Dennis, whatever you say, it just sounds like common sense. I said, that's exactly right. I'm a conservative because I use common sense. It's not that I have a pre-existing ideological bent. If you look at life, As with common sense, you end up with conservative answers.
Well, I think that the mistake that the left makes is they mistake the normative for the descriptive. What they wish life would be.
That's right.
They say that this is what life actually is,
yes,
right, or can
exactly.
be.
Yep.
And then,
right.
and the right, we don't say that the descriptive is normative, that what is what it should be, but we separate between the two. We say, here's the descriptive, here's the normative.
Right.
Sometimes we can get to the normative, sometimes we can't.
So you're a religious Jew. I'm a religious Jew. You're Orthodox. I'm not Orthodox. But by the way, you accept this. A lot of Jews find that confusing. You accept, and I don't mean in a personal sense, obviously, but you theologically,
right, I won't put you in car race.
You would accept the possibility of being a religious Jew who isn't Orthodox.
Well, I think, yeah. I mean, you accept the divinity of the Bible.
Right, exactly. Yes.
You interpret
the
it.
Chosenness, all the 13
You interpret
principles
it
of
in many ways more literally than rabbinical Judaism.
Yes,
so,
that's correct.
Yeah,
yes.
So,
all right. So no. So
we
I'm
may
just
disagree on
making,
halakha, but that's not
that's
the same
halakha is
thing.
Jewish law, right? Right, exactly. So it plays a seminal role in my life. It is a stability giver. It has always been such. Knowing there is a God, that God revealed himself at Sinai, these give me great peace. Does that a role it plays for you?
Yeah, 100%. 100%. I mean, because the fact is that, it says in, not to get into giving divrei Torah, not into giving, kind of expository analyses of the Bible, but this week's Parsha is
the portion of the Torah.
There's a section of the Torah that's very cryptic where it talks about Moses wants to see God's face, and God says, no, you can't see my face and live. You can see my back. I'll put you in the crevice in the rock, and then you can see my back. And my dad, I thought, had a good interpretation of this, and that was that if you're really familiar with somebody, you can identify them from behind, right? You can see their back, and you can tell, okay, that's my dad, that's my wife, that's somebody that I know. But you can't see their face, you can't see their purpose, you can't see exactly what they're doing. But knowing that they're there is comforting. And that's true for me and my vision of God, which is I don't know what he's going to do. I don't know what his plan is, but I trust that there is a plan, and I don't have to see his face in order to trust that there's a plan, because I'm not capable of understanding it. But as long as I'm following him, as long as I can see his back, there's a certain level of comfort there.
I like that. You tell your father I like that.
Okay. Well.
No. I find that's a very good way of just knowing I don't have to see your face. You're God. I don't need to see your face. I just have to know you're there. Woody Allen said that once, But Woody Allen may be somewhat nutty, but he is very funny. What is his line? If only God would sneeze. Have you heard that?
No.
Yeah, I just wanted to sneeze, So ironically, that's a very traditional view. I just want to know you're there. Mm-hmm. By the way, you will love this, I think. Do you know, I don't know if you've, and I don't expect you to have, but I wrote about this. And I often have debated atheists on video and in person and on the radio show. I now have really only one question for an atheist. Do you hope you're right or wrong? Mm-hmm. If they say, I hope I'm wrong, I know I'm dealing with an atheist who has thought the issue through. If they hope they're right, I don't believe they've thought the issue through.
Well, the problem for atheists when it comes to if they're right is that all of civilization breaks down almost immediately if you apply the principle.
Exactly.
Because if you believe
and meaning in life.
I mean, just on a deterministic basis. I mean, if you're a true atheist, you believe that if we had a giant computer and we could feed all information about biology and physics into a computer, I could predict down to literally the millisecond when you're going to take the next puff on that cigar.
That's correct. Yes.
And so then there's no personal responsibility for anything, no matter what sort of crime is committed. How can you attribute responsibility? People can't live like that. You can't have a society built on the idea that nobody's responsible for their actions because it's self-defeating. Okay, so
right. So maybe they even might agree we have to punish people because we want to put that input into the computer.
But they can't put the input into the computer. The input was already in the computer.
Right, in the ultimate analysis, it's all yes.
Right, it's all.
But I when I ask that question, though, it's really even on an emotional basis. Just one example: if there's a God, there's an afterlife. Right? This can't be the only thing there is, right? You were with me, right? Yeah. Okay. So I just say, let me ask you: you don't want to see your loved ones after death? You are at perfect peace that you will never see any of those that you loved? I don't understand that.
Yeah, I mean there's no question that religion is comforting. I think that this is why so many atheists see themselves as steely-eyed missile men willing to look truth in the face. Right? I mean, there's a very self-flattering aspect.
I don't think they look truth in the face, because when they say, if they look truth in the face from their perspective, if they'd say they hope they're wrong,
right?
then I
No,
then,
that
look,
I agree with,
I
yeah.
know, I understand the truth. I'm not happy with it, but hey, I got to do it. I asked Charles Crowder. You would love this. I play it on my show periodically. Whenever I have Charles Krauthammer on, and by the way, for those of you interested, the Prager University weekend, it's called the Summit. We have that every year, and we're going to have Charles Krauthammer this year, among others. And I always talk to him about non-political stuff. If people want to know his politics, he's on Fox.
He writes about it, yeah.
He writes about it. You can watch him on Fox anytime you want. So I asked him the last time we had a dialogue, I said, so what are you religiously? I mean, how many people ask Krauthammer that question? He loves this stuff. So he goes, I'm agnostic. So I said, what do you think of atheism? And I was certain he'd say, look, some people are atheists. I'm an agnostic. He went into a rant. It is the stupidest idea he has ever. I have never crapped on atheism as much as Charles Krauthammer, a thoroughly secular individual. Isn't that fact? It shows he's thought it through.
Right. Well, I mean, I think that this is the thing that atheists don't understand about religious people, is that most religious people understand that there is a leap of faith that takes place somewhere in here, and they're willing to acknowledge it. A lot of atheists don't acknowledge that. They say that no, there's no leap of faith to atheism. It's just logic that drives me to atheism. And that's not true. Logic drives you to agnosticism, perhaps, but the idea that it drives you to atheism is just not true.
Right. Totally. I mean, my brother who went to Harvard Medical School, and I only mention it because it's relevant to giving his credentials, okay? And he's a professor of medicine at Columbia. And he said he became certain, and my brother is a very rational man, said, I became certain that there was a God at Harvard Medical School, which is already shocks people. He said, when I looked in the microscope and I saw the infinite complexity of the cell, he said, this stuff is random? That's logical?
So what made you believe in God?
You will love this. I have a very circuitous route and I'll be very brief. But you will love this. I wrote a piece, How I Found God at Columbia. It's on the internet for all of you who want to. It's brief. It's 700 words. So this is what happened. I'm at Columbia graduate school, and I'm learning nonsense. Literally nonsense. Men and women are basically the same. And I was in international affairs, so I was being taught the United States was equally responsible for the Cold War as the Soviet Union. I mean, can you imagine? Stalin and Truman are equally responsible for the Cold War. It's mind-boggling, as was that men and women are basically the same, and so much other nonsense. So one day, wandering around the quad or whatever it's called at Columbia, 116th and Broadway in Manhattan, and I all of a sudden, and I give you my word because it sounds a little surreal, but I never exaggerate. All of a sudden, in my brain, what we said in yeshiva, you attended yeshiva, I attended yeshiva, is religious Jewish school, half-day Jewish studies, half-day secular studies. All of a sudden, in Hebrew, came Reshit Chochmah Yirat Hashem. The famous, I think it's Proverbs, wisdom begins with fear of God. And I realized, oh my God, the reason there's no wisdom at Columbia is that there's no God at Columbia. And that's what really started solidifying for me. And the reason I say it's circuitous is that I came to a very strong belief in God thanks to secularists. Secularism made me religious. I saw there is no alternative.
Yeah, I think that that's true for a lot of religious people, is that they look and they say, there's either a plan that I can live by or there's not a plan that I can live by, and I either have a choice in that plan or I don't have a choice in that plan. And life betrays the idea that there's no plan and that you can't live by that plan and succeed through your own free choice. Free will, to me, is the best proof of God. The idea that you have the capacity to make choices in your life that make your life better.
And the atheists deny it.
Right, exactly. And that crumbles society. So we can try that.
Right, and it crumbles logic. Please, do they really believe there is no free choice? Now, by the way, there are times where I do wonder, when a man molests a 5-year-old, I mean, I understand a bank robber, Okay, but I know it's wrong to rob, so I don't rob. Okay, fine.
Yeah, no, mental illness is
But I don't understand molesting a child. I mean, it's not like I have to battle it.
Right.
So the guy who does it, obviously, I'm not saying he had no free will, but he had no free will vis-a-vis that desire.
Right. Well, it's and that's I think the serious problem that honestly the biggest problem to faith, I think, is mental illness, like severe mental illness. If you see people who are severely mentally ill,
I want to tell you why I'm shaking your hand. I want to tell you this very touching what you just said. You know, my close friend since high school is Rabbi Joseph Talishka. Mm-hmm. We wrote 2 books together, and we're working on a commentary on the Torah together, and so on. And he has always said that is his biggest single question. Just what you just said about yourself. Why don't you explain it for a moment?
Well, I mean, having people who were like my grandfather had schizophrenia, and you see that people literally do not have freedom of choice when they're mentally ill, and then you see that their brain chemistry can be changed through medicine, suddenly their freedom of choice is open again. And so you say, okay, well, God, you see the whole purpose here was that there was going to be freedom of choice, and then there's a whole subset of human beings who don't have freedom of choice.
Yes.
Or at least their freedom of choice is so closely circumscribed that there's not much they can do about it. Right. And so that's the crisis of faith with regard to mental illness, because which makes sense if the basis of your faith.
So
is
what
free
do
will.
you do with it? You just leave the question there and say, look, I can't answer every question. I'm a finite human, or what?
Well,
what do you do with it?
I mean, I think that there's some of both. I think also that the idea that human beings. There's 2 questions. One is corporate free choice and the free choice of other people to help you when you have mental illness, and their free choice is not circumscribed in trying to bring you back to health, and that's and so that is to a certain extent proof of God, because they're able to actually help you get back to the godly state where your free will is available. And then there's the idea that and this is a typically religious idea, that people are given different challenges in life, unfortunately, and some of those challenges are near impossible. And that is that maybe the free choice is limited to whether you eat dinner or not tonight, but that's the challenge that's placed in front of certain people. And hopefully we can break through that with medical care and provide a broader freedom. But I mean, I'm not going to pretend it's an easy problem to solve. If I had an easy answer, it wouldn't be a problem.
Now let me tell you a very fascinating. You've just heard with 2 religious people acknowledging issues that may not be answerable by us vis-a-vis God. So listen to this. You will love this. So I was invited about 8 years ago, to their credit, the biggest atheist group in the U.S., I think it's called Atheists United. Mm-hmm. They invited me to their national convention, which, of course, when did they have it? On Easter Sunday. It's so typical.
Yeah.
Right. So they invited me to debate their head. And I was honored, and to their credit, by the way, they paid the fee before I spoke. I just want to say this on behalf of the atheists. Not all religious groups have done this, as I'm sure you have experienced. But anyway, so I looked at the audience at one point, and I said, raise your hand if you ever doubt your atheism. Not one hand went up. There must have been 500 people there. And then I said, it's very interesting. You look at yourselves, you atheists, as, we, unlike the religious, we question. But I want you to know, I said, I don't know a religious person who has never had doubts. You never have doubts, but we acknowledge when we have them. So who's more open to questions?
I think that's exactly right. Look, it's the fundamental root of the word Yisrael, right? Israel is about struggle with God. Mm-hmm. It's not the idea it's when Jacob is renamed Israel and the entire Jewish people are named after Israel. When that happens, he's not renamed, now you have perfect faith in God, right? And Jacob is described by all the commentators as a simple man, meaning like a simple man of faith, but he's not a simple man of faith, right? He's someone who struggles with God. That's right. His actual name.
And I always tell Jews who are claim to not believe in God, but who identify as Jews, I just want you to know the name of the Jewish people is Israel. It means struggle with God. That means not just believers are to struggle. Atheists have to struggle too.
Yeah. And if you're struggling with God, that means that there's a baseline level of belief. You don't struggle with nothing. You don't struggle with the air. If you're struggling with the justice in the universe, there's part of you that knows that the universe is supposed to be better than it is.
That's
and
right.
so now you're struggling with something that's beyond yourself. Like Bernie Sanders, this big atheist, he talks about he's an atheist all the time, and every tweet of his is, why isn't the universe fairer? What are you struggling with? I mean,
Well,
so the
that's
universe
right.
isn't fair.
Exactly.
Okay, so who cares?
Yes, well, it's not supposed to be. It's random.
Right.
If you're a real atheist.
So what's he struggling with?
There's
Why are
no-
socialists? Why are socialists struggling with the unfairness of the universe if that's just the way the universe is?
Yes, exactly. It's like It's like struggling. I don't want H2O to be water. It is. It's
If you're a
just the way-
if you're a total materialist, you
Yes.
shouldn't be struggling with income inequality. You should say that's the way things are. You certainly shouldn't. You shouldn't actually be
Right.
struggling with
And
human
where-
inequality.
Where
because
does
the
better
fact-
come from? Neurological impulses?
Yeah, exactly.
What is our time frame? I know I'm supposed to take questions, but this is too interesting and it's too much fun. So what should I do? Take questions or continue? Take some questions. All right, let's see. What do we? You know what? This is really funny. I mentioned to them because we're getting in questions, and they're almost all political.
Political, yeah.
When I'm on alone, thank God it's not all political. I am interested in politics because there's no choice.
Right.
But my inherent interests don't lie there.
Well, values are more interesting than politics.
Oh,
politics
God.
is just the branch.
That,
the
yes,
values are the root.
it's yes. So anyway, all right. Here's a non-political. What's your advice to young adults who are dating to marry? What are some basic guidelines they should follow? Okay, I'll let you.
Okay.
I'll take a
I have
crack
a
at
simple
that.
one. I always offer
Yes.
this one unsolicited at my college speeches. Do not date or marry someone of a different political persuasion than yourself. Do not date or marry someone with a different set of values than you have. Because the bottom line is that, look, when you first meet someone, your first priority is to have as much sex with that person as you can possibly have in a short period
you're speaking
of
as
time.
a male. I just
Yeah,
just
that's a male
No,
perspective,
yes,
okay?
exactly.
Like just
Yes.
speaking for every male on planet Earth.
Right.
This is just the way that it works. Okay?
Including gay males.
Including gay males.
That's
this
right.
is true for
Yes.
every man on planet Earth. But then it turns out, and science actually demonstrates this, that over the period of time, basically the level of emotional intimacy that you have with your partner goes up, and the level of sexual intimacy that you have with your partner goes down, because it can only go down from infinity. So when that happens, you're going to be left staring at each other, and not when you're naked, and you're going to actually have to determine what are the values that we want to live with, what's the life we're going to create together.
Right.
All your conversations end up with your wife, unlike some of the conversations with friends, which are just frivolous. A lot of conversations with your wife end up just being about the life that you're building together, and so you better have a common vision of what that life is going to be and what the values that you're going to inculcate in your children.
Right. Well, so
are
some
going to be
people
as
will
well.
say, I want to get back to your first point, with which I totally agree. So some people will say, hey, I share a vision of our personal life with the man or woman I'm dating, but we don't, we're totally apart politically. But that is a value issue.
Yeah, that's right.
And so you may have the same vision. We both want one child, 2 children, or we both want to work, or we both want to live in X, Y, or Z city. But that's not what you mean.
Right. No, and one of the decisions you have to make is whether you are going to be a couple that actually cares about politics or a couple that doesn't, or politics are going to be completely separate from your life or not. Because
It's
if you don't-
impossible not to care.
I mean, I agree with that, and I think all the couples that I know who say that they're going to put it aside, 5-10 years in,
Pay a
eventually it
price.
comes back in, and then they're angry at
Yes.
each other because they voted a different way in the election. So it's. I think when people the reason politics is interesting, and it's not just gossip, is because it is a reflection of deeper values that human beings have, and so to pretend that it's not is just foolishness, or to pretend that you're more
Right.
open-minded because you're dating somebody of a different value system. Listen, I talk with people of different value systems all the time. I do it for a living. You do too. We're constantly engaging people with different value systems. Does that mean that someone I want to build my entire life around? No, because I want to build my entire life around the value system. That's why I care about politics. And someone's either going to help me in that task or they're not going to help me in that task.
It's critical because it's so tempting to overlook these things when you're madly in love and madly in lust and all of that stuff. But it's ultimately, it causes terrible rifts in marriages. Once you're married, I want you to love each other up, even if you're a Republican and Democrat and so on. But don't get married to begin with.
Yeah,
if you
exactly.
are. Here is an example, and I'm assuming, I assume you're for capital punishment for murder? Right. I have argued that is, to me, the greatest example of the unbridgeable gap between the two sides. I understand almost every single position that I differ with, but I don't understand people who think that it is good and moral and decent to keep every murderer alive. I can't relate to it. A man rapes and tortures a woman and then strangles her, and you believe that he has a right to stay alive? it's an unbridgeable gap to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's to be honest with you, on my first date with my wife, we had the free will versus determinism conversation.
By the way, I had first dates like that too, which didn't always end up well.
Yeah,
but if they ended up well, it was a chance to be married.
Hey, listen, I moved fast. We were engaged after 3.5 months, and we were married after 10.
Right.
And we've now been married. We're coming up on, let's see, it's 2017. We're coming up on 9 years.
Wow.
Which moved really fast. We have a couple kids, but yeah, first date was. Like, we actually numbered our dates by the topics we discussed. So, first date was free will and determinism. Second date was gun control and capital punishment. And so, we covered all the ground we needed to cover.
Is this awesome or is this awesome?
See, this is, cut to the meat of the matter, Uncle Eddie. Like, you just get right down to brass tacks.
Right.
Because the first question for most couples, this is the part that's so stupid, is when people are dating, they spend so much time on how attractive the other person is. That question is answered literally within the first 30 seconds of meeting someone. Right? I mean, literally in the first 30 seconds, the person's either attractive or they're not. Certainly for the man. Okay, for the woman, women grow to have emotional intimacy, and that has an effect on how they see physical intimacy.
Right.
But the truth is that even women will look at a guy and they'll either be like, okay, that's something that's in my range, that's something that's totally not in my range.
Right.
And so that question is now solved. So we can put that to the side. So if you're actually going to spend an inordinate amount of time with this person, wouldn't it be good if you shared a few things beyond the fact that you want to have sex with one another? But our society has decided that that's actually last priority. If the first priority of the relationship is you go into the relationship knowing I'm aiming for a relationship in which I'm going to be the husband in the sense of I'm going to take care of my spouse and my children, and being a wife, I'm going to help take care and honor my husband, which is a big thing, honoring your husband. Like, if a man feels disrespected by his wife, it's one of the worst things that can happen in a marriage. And if she goes in knowing that, then the question becomes, okay, is this someone who's worthy of my honor? Right? Is this someone who is worthy of my respect? And then she can decide, if this is, then maybe this is a person I can marry. If this is a person I have no respect for, then this is obviously not something that I should be doing. And same for the husband.
Now, here's an interesting, sad point. I totally resonate to your first date conversation. I don't know, what else am I going to talk about? Your favorite movie?
Right.
I don't even understand. I mean, why is that interesting?
We did do one date that was like favorite TV show.
Okay,
that was a less memorable date.
Right. Okay, and it wasn't even your first one, as you say. You were talking about free will on your first one.
Yeah.
It's like I tell people.
It was a 4-hour date about free will.
I tell people why I was not good as a pickup artist, because the woman would say to me, "Oh, and what do you do?" And I think, well, I write and lecture on ethical monotheism. Which was you never saw that. Wow.
Yeah, exactly.
I gotta go home with this guy. So I totally resonate to that. But here's the issue to me. There are so many young people, and I don't blame them. I'm not blaming them. I think it's a product of our terrible educational system and our secularism. They don't think about these issues.
Well,
so they can't have a first date on free will because they haven't thought through free will.
Well, because I think also there's a bigger issue with dating, and that is that people think that the first issue in marriage is love, and it's not. The first issue in marriage is commitment. And our entire society teaches people that the first thing you should look for is love. And then they show them romantic movies about people who are in love with each other in the first 6 weeks of their relationship. And then they'll show you 20 years in,
I know,
when people are passing gas and they're a little fatter now. And, they never show that part of the marriage, because that's the part that actually matters. That's what most of the rest of your life is going to be. It's not going to be you gallivanting around on a beach in Hawaii. It's going to be you cleaning up your child's vomit at 3 a.m. when she's got the flu. That's what most of your life actually is. And so is that a person that you can look at 3 o'clock in the morning and think, God, I'm glad I'm on the same team as this person. We're building a life together. Or is it going to be like, oh, I wish I were with that other chick in Hawaii right now on the beach?
You will love this. You know this man, Shmuley, Rabbi Shmuley. Mm-hmm. So I've been friends with him for many, many years. He brought me to Oxford very, very many years ago when he was the rabbi there. And we've been, friends, it's like, I guess, 25 years or so. Anyway, he told me in a car once, he was driving, I'll never forget, and he said, the difference between our approach, he's a member of this Jewish group called Chabad, and, ultra-Orthodox, but worldly. Mm-hmm. And he said, here's the difference. In Western society, you fall in love, then you get married. We get married and then fall in love. I thought that was a very interesting approach.
I mean, that's historically more common in terms of marriage than not. I mean, it's a Western invention the other way around. But I think that there is a happy medium, which is,
of course,
clearly. And the happy medium really is
right.
But here's the part where he's right. You actually decide you're going to get married, and then you fall in love.
Okay,
that's a different thing.
Another magic word. We could do this for a long time. I realize. Another magic word. Decision. This is
if one were to say to me, what did you learn in the last 10 years? Because I learned a lot before the last 10 years. But I would say one of the biggest realizations of my life has been essentially everything is a decision. You decide to be happy. You decide to be religious. You decide to marry. You decide to love. Everything that we think is just comes, in fact, is a decision.
I think that's totally true. I mean, that's also obviously a very religious sentiment, right? I mean, the Bible actually tells you there are certain times when you are bound to be happy.
That's right.
It actually orders you to be happy.
I got it from, as usual, from those great 5 books called the Torah. That's exactly right.
But it's true. My dad said this long ago about marriage to me. He said, like, the biggest mistake people make is they think, oh, I'll fall in love with somebody and then I'll decide to get married. And what that actually shows, I mean, the social science statistics back this up. If you fall in love with somebody and you live with them for 3, 5, 7 years, and then you figure, okay, eventually I'll decide that it's worth getting married, the divorce rates on those relationships are extraordinarily high, much higher than they are if you say, I've decided, now I'm going to get married. Because now you've buckled down to the mindset, okay, what does it take? Who am I looking for to get married to? And that's not the same thing as who's somebody who I love and I fall, and you can't decide who you love. That's not even true either, actually. You can decide who it is that you love. You can't decide who you lust for. But I think that you can decide who you decide to enter into engagement with, who you decide to spend time with, who you decide to fall in love with. There is an element of choice to that.
There's, as I say, there is to everything. It's liberating to know that I'll just take the religion one.
Well, it's liberating and also scary, right? It's liberating because you have a choice. It's scary because now you're responsible for it.
Okay, but it's liberating. But right, I agreed. But you and I are the type, we love responsibility, so It's not a dirty word. So I can live with that. But knowing that if I make the decision, I understood that God was a decision. God is not going to appear to me. I am not going to have Paul's road to Damascus theophany. But I decided I am going to believe in God and live as if there is a God. Others have decided I'll live as if there is forget the atheist. The agnostic lives as if there isn't. Why would you if you're in the middle, why would you make that decision? It's a richer decision the other way.
It is a richer decision. It's also a decision more likely to lead to happiness and lifelong success.
Yeah.
I mean, if you decide to live as if there's no God, that really means you're deciding to live as if there's no responsibility to anything outside yourself. And if you're living as if there's no responsibility to anything outside yourself, you're going to live a pretty lonely life.
Well, that's a big problem in our society, loneliness. People are afraid to get married early. You got married early. I think that's terrific.
Yeah, I was 24. My wife is 20.
Right. My father was 19. My mother was 18. They were married 69 years, together 73. And can you make a wrong decision at 19? Well, let me be open and humble. I made. She's a wonderful woman, and I truly mean that. And we have a phenomenal son together. But we both didn't choose right from just a marriage standpoint at 32. So this notion, I don't know at 21, but I will at 32. I'm not sure that that's true.
I don't think there's an ideal age for marriage. I think there's an ideal process through which you make a decision, but I don't think that it's based on like this idea that you're wiser at 40 after having gone through 20 partners, and now you're really prepared to get married. I think it's a bunch of crap. I think it's a bunch of hooey. And I can speak as somebody who has an incredibly happy marriage. Like I heard your show the other day, and you were asking people to like self-rate their own marriages, on a scale of 1 to 10 or from A to F.
I'm a big 1 to 10 fan.
Yeah, on a 1 to 10 scale. I don't think it would be dishonest to say that anybody has like a 10 because nothing's perfect. But my wife and I have about a 9. We have a really phenomenal marriage. Right. We were both virgins when we were married. We both knew that when we were, before we were married. That was actually something that we were looking for and we thought was valuable because we wanted to be innocent coming into marriage. And that was, I think, like we both had standards. We had check boxes that we checked before we decided to get married. Right. And that's not going to guarantee success, but it's going to make your likelihood a hell of a lot higher than if you have no check boxes. I mean, It's like it sounds ridiculous to compare it to this, but if you're check the Yelp reviews before you go visit a restaurant. I mean, it's better than you're not going to get the chances of food poisoning are a lot lower if you've actually taken a look at the restaurant beforehand.
How much time do we have? One more question. We could have one more question. What is the capital of South Dakota? No, I'm kidding. This is whatever you know where I got that from. You will love it. You remember? You wouldn't remember, but you know Groucho Marx,
right? Yeah.
No, it's Bismarck's North Dakota.
Right, yeah.
Right, Pierre. But it doesn't matter. So do you know where I got this from? Groucho Marx. Groucho Marx was at a seance, was it? Was it, they were meeting the dead, right? So they said, okay, sir, it is your time for a question. What's the capital of South Dakota? So ever since then, I have had the most serious authors on my show. And I go, I'd just like to begin with, what is the capital of South Dakota? And I'm expecting some author to hang up on me. Nobody warned me. I'm on with a nut. But that's where isn't it great? Is that a great line?
That's really funny.
I mean, if the dead don't know the capital of South Dakota, what are they going to tell you?
Well, I mean, they're certainly not in consonance with God, right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. All right, look, anything else is going to be, even though the questions are great, but I'm just going to tell you, this has been a total joy.
Well, thank you for having me. It's, as you always, I mean, I say this every time, but it's always an honor to sit with you. Again,
it's mutual.
Since your voice has been in my ear since basically my ears were formed. I appreciate it.
That's true, as it happens, ironically. Oh, by the way, this is a big honor to you that this dog, notice, I live with this dog, he sits with Ben. Is that right? It is not right. When you're insulted by your own dog, it's humiliating. Anyway, Ben, keep up the great work.
Hey, you too. Thanks so much.
The country needs you. So, folks, till next time, Dennis Prager, my weekly fireside chat. Thanks for watching.